Welcome. I hope you will find this tutorial useful for learning how to add environment variables in Playwright test scripts. When you are developing test scripts, there are times when input data needs to be secure. It is normal for a company to frown on test scripts that have secure or private data embedded. For example, your application user credentials such as ID and password should not be compromised by hard coding them in a test script and leaving them there. Having an external way to save private data is a better approach. One way to accomplish this is storing private data in system environment variables. Another way is to store the data in a file that is not easily located or it is password protected. Then the solution should include a way to read the data via the test script. I would like to introduce two useful solutions with that in mind. The first solution for this is to use system environment variables. The variables are local to the test execution machine. The test script must have a means that can read and make the data available to an application under test. Let's set up my test environment to demonstrate the first solution using system environment variables. For my test environment, I use PyCharm as an IDE. That's what you're seeing here. You may have a different IDE, and that's okay. I am not aware of an IDE that cannot read system environment variables, so you should be fine. Here is a TypeScript script that is very basic. It is designed strictly to test whether system environment variables are populated or not. So all I have is a test group, which is part of what Playwright provides you for TypeScript, and there are two console.log statements, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Before we run the script, let me show you my system environment variables that I'm going to use in the test. We go to the search. I would normally type in something like system environment variables or environment, and a selection would come up. In this case, edit the system environment. That's good enough. That gets me directly where I need to go. And you see a screen, something like this, system properties, and I'm interested in environment variables. So I click on that button, and now I can see the environment variables. There are two groups of them, the user variables and the system variables. I'm interested in the system variables this time. So I'm going to scroll down, and I should see two variables that I set up a little while ago. And the first one is right here, pass ID. And it has a value of secret_value. And then there's another should be user ID. This one right here, user ID, user_Wally. And if I click on the edit button, you can actually see the values. That's the variable name, user ID. It's all in caps. And the value that's associated with that variable is, in this case, user_Wally. Could be anything. All right, cancel that, cancel this, and this. And we're back to my test environment in PyCharm. Now I'm ready to run the test script. When it is completed, you will see the results in the terminal window. And the two environment variables will be displayed, and it will show the variable name followed by the value itself. Both will be displayed. And that is because I'm showing the console.log command has user ID, which is the variable name, followed by process.env.userid. I'll talk about that a little bit more after the test. Let's go ahead and get that test going. We type in npx Playwright test, script name, example 1b .spec .ts, and I want to add an option, project, so that I can specify a single browser driver, Chromium, so that we'll use the Chrome for testing and not run actually 3. By default, it's set to do 3 tests. I just want 1. So this should be fairly quick. Almost, here we go. We've got the 1 running for Chromium. And now you see there are the 2 variables. The user ID, user Wally, is the value, and the pass ID is secret underscore value. So those were the actual values we saw in the system variables listed, and we're able to pick them up inside this test script. Looking back at the script, you can see the syntax. The important part of your scripting is how to retrieve the variables and their values. You can specify process.env. whatever the variable name is anywhere in your Playwright script to reference the data. So if you are desiring to input the data into other objects or screen locators, it is doable. It should be obvious that this solution is not highly secure. However, it is a useful solution. You are storing the data in a semi-private area. You don't normally display your environment variables, so it is somewhat secure from public eyes. The data is not portable, so that means you're not transporting a secure file with your scripts if they need to be located on another machine. However, you can set up the variables on another machine with its own private data. Well, what about a second solution? Playwright and some other test languages are supported by a library called .env. The concept supports reading a file to obtain private data. This approach is another useful solution. There are many videos and articles written on the subject. I regret to say that some of the presentations I was not able to follow or did not work on my machine. So I had to read between the lines, so to speak, and discover what was working and what was not working in my test environment. It is my hope that you find what I share does work on your machine. Here is what I had to do to set up to use .env in my TypeScript scripts. Let's talk about what it takes now to install .env, set it up, and run a test using .env. First of all, if you notice here on my terminal, I have a command, npm install .env --save. This is the command that needs to be executed first in order to install .env on your desktop or laptop. And I've already done that. I ran the statement again to see what it would do, and this is basically what you would see. In my case, it's up to date, audited 5 packages, and found no vulnerabilities, so it is ready to go. Now, the next thing that you need to be aware of is that you're going to point to the root directory. And in my case, I renamed it to pwtests with an S. And you can see that in the Playwright configuration file. I'm going to switch over to it to show you real quick. And right down here, right here, you can see on this line, I have testdir, and I've put in ./pwtest. So that tells Playwright what is the root directory, and that you need to know. And you'll see why in a moment. Now, I'll go back to the script, and what you will see, there are basically 2 statements that need to be added to a script in order to be able to process using .env. So .env, once more, is the tool or library that's used to be able to pull user variables from a file. So what it does is there is a command that you issue, .env.config, and that will actually read what you tell it to read. And what we're telling it to read is we're telling it to go to a path ./pwtest/ that's the root directory, .env, which is a file that has been created in this folder or directory. Now, let's take a quick look at what's in this particular file. Click right here, and here are 2 variables that I've defined. One, user ID 1. If you remember, I had user ID and pass ID. They are system variables. I didn't delete those. They're still out there. If I specified user ID and pass ID, it would pick up those values and not what I want it to pick up, which is in this file, .env. The values, I've also changed that so that you could see the last part of it is in caps, so that you can see that it's picking up these values and not the system value variables, which were all lowercase. Hopefully that helps you there. All right, so we have a file. It has 2 variables defined. You could define as many variables as you wish. You don't have to use them all. You can pick and choose what you need to use in your script. Now, going back to the script one more time, and let's look at this a little closer. On the first line, here we start with an import for .env. And this is the syntax here. Import asterisk as .env from .env. That must be the first statement in the script. So typically, the script might have one or more other import statements specifically for test, expect from Playwright. And it will have typically a test command, at least one. It can have multiple. I'm just using that to be able to go after the variables. In this case, this time, it won't be system environment variables, but it will be variables that are defined in a .env file. Now, that .env could be .env, .test, .env, .prod, and so on. It can have additional labeling for that, or I should say extensions for that file. But typically the first one is a .env. This is not a typo. It is, the dot goes first, .env. All right. I've said enough on that. So we have two things that have been added to the script that we tested before for the system variable access. We didn't have the .env config, and we didn't have that first import. All we had was this import and the test command. Hopefully you understand that so far. Hopefully it made sense. We have line 1, line 4, 5, and 6, just as they are. Make sure you know what your root directory is, and it's defined in the configuration file, and then specify it here, and then the .env file should be in your root directory. And if we look over here on the left, here's the root directory, and there's the .env file. I hope that helps you there. Now, we should be ready to run. I'm going to clear this and type in npx Playwright. Whoops, that's not right. Playwright test example 3 .spec .ts, and I want to put in a project option to specify Chromium 1. Whoops. And that should do it. Let's click on that command and let's see what we get. Momentarily. There it is, starting. And there we are. If you'll notice, the values are user underscore Wally, caps, secret underscore value. So it picked up the values that are in this .env file. And I didn't specify I didn't change this value. I could have put in this console.log and put in an actual variable name in quotes so that it would display that as well. I didn't do that in this particular instance, but that's okay. You should know that the first one is the user ID and the second one is the secret value. And one more time, bear with me, we did user ID 1 and pass ID 1. So we're not getting the system variables. We're getting the variables that are defined in .env. I hope that was clear enough and sufficient. We're going to move on. There is one more thing I should tell you. Some of us may not like having to add the .env code to each script. There is a variation to this solution. The same code I described that you add to the script can be added in the Playwright configuration file. The one that's called playwright.config.ts. This particular file right here. The console.log reference is not really required. Only the process.env references are required in the test scripts to access the private data values. That is, once you set up the configuration file correctly. And we'll talk about that momentarily. By default, there is a commented out require statement in the Playwright configuration file, and it is only useful for JavaScript testing, not TypeScript testing. So I left that statement commented out, but I added the .env.config statement. So let's look at that a little closer again. If I scroll back up here, this is normally in this configuration file. Read environment variables from the file. And there's some documentation you can find out on GitHub at this address. Well, this require statement is not needed. That's strictly for JavaScript. Why it's in the TypeScript configuration file, I don't know. But I left that commented out. Now, I had put these three statements in. These are the same statements that were in the script and that you would normally put in each script that you want to use .env. Well, I can comment out, uncommented, I should say. Here and here. So now I have this .env.config that is going to process in the configuration file. Also, up at the top, the import. That's needed. Normally you put that in the script as well. Well, we don't have to put it into the script. We can put it here as the first line in the configuration file. So we have that. We have the .env config, and that's it for changing the configuration file. We still have the .env as it is, and of course, when the configuration file is processed, that's when the .env file will be processed and all of the variables defined in there will become ready to be utilized in every script that executes. Now, speaking of the script, as I said, we don't need this import, so I'm going to comment it out for now. I'm not getting rid of it, just comment it out. And same here for the .env config. We'll comment it out, and the next two lines as well. Now, so we're still looking for user ID 1 and pass ID 1 in the .env file, but we're not processing it in the script. So now the scripts don't need to change other than using the process.env.userID or whatever variable name you want to refer to, and that allows you to assign that value that's in those variables to something in your script. And as I mentioned earlier, I believe I did, and make sure I did, in the test group here, you could have more than one or only one, and you would have a number of statements inside the test group that would process an application. But I got rid of all of that in order to just focus on how to get this environment to work. And so this is showing you that it works. In order to do that now, we're going to have to do a couple more things. We've made changes to the configuration file so that it now will process the .env and the .env file, excuse me, and we've changed the script to no longer use those same two commands, but it can access the variables. And what we need to do is, if I just did this now and tried to test, it wouldn't work because this configuration file has already been processed. So I've changed it, and now what I need to do is to shut down my test environment and restart it. It takes a moment, bear with me. And I'm going to start it again. It's coming up on the other screen as soon as it's rendered. It will display here on this screen now. So now everything should be recycled and restarted properly so that we will get the right information. Okay. We're ready to try to run the test. So what are we going to do? We're going to be using this new modified version of the configuration file, and we're using the same test file. It does not have any reference to, excuse me, to .env. Type the test statement again. Test example 3.spec.ts. Let me verify, and I want -- project. Oops. Equal Chromium. Okay, we should be ready. Let me just take a pan over here in my test environment. Everything looks like it's okay. Ready to run. Let's see what happens. We're running the test. And there we are. Here are the values: user underscore Wally and secret underscore value. So it picked up user ID 1 and pass ID 1 from the env file that's located in the root directory for Playwright. So I have one more thing to just mention. I really, truly hope you find what I showed you, these solutions, I hope you find them useful and that it has reduced or eliminated the confusion that you may have encountered trying to get either solution working. I hope that it all has been resolved in your mind and that you're ready to make use of this like I am. Happy testing, and thank you for your time.